Welcome to Serious Business on NDTV. 30 minutes of hard business news. One topic, one speaker, and a conversation that's relevant to you. I'm Manvi Sinha Dhillon. It's been a data-heavy week. The Indian economy grew 8.4% in the October to December quarter, surpassing the predictions of most economists. And after a 10-year gap, the National Sample Survey Office released its Household Consumption Expenditure Survey, which is a nationwide survey of household spending patterns that is usually undertaken every 5 years. I'm just going to refer to one broad point from the consumption survey. A person living in rural India spent 2,773 rupees a month on average as consumption expenditure in 22-23, while his or her urban counterpart spent 6,459 rupees a month. And there is a decline in the rural-urban inequality. The consumption survey aids policy making, aids in the construct of the consumer price index, helps estimate GDP and helps business industry in determining its medium and long-term growth strategies. So it's quite fortuitous that this week we can take a deep dive into consumer India with Rama Bijapurkar, a business advisor, a researcher and an academic. She describes her work as bringing the people view to business strategy and public policy, and she has a new book out, Lilliput Land, How Small is Driving India's Mega Consumption Story. Rama, delighted you could join us on NDTV. Congratulations on your latest book.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for having me here.
India, sure, it's the world's 5th largest economy, but when it comes to consumer India, reading your book, I get the sense the key word is small. And I presume that's why it's called Lilliput Land. So why and in what sense is small so important?
It's called Lilliput Land because it is the power of small that adds up to a lot. So if you look at our GDP ranking on an aggregate basis, it's huge, it's very high, it's lovely. If you look at it in terms of per capita income, which we often don't talk about, it is well below our rank of 100. So it is little drops of water, little grains of sand. It's our demand structure is a lot of people consuming a little bit each that adds up to a lot. Unlike many other more developed markets where there are a few people who consume a lot, that adds up to a lot too. And so that is one aspect of small consumers. The other aspect is that as large companies have chosen to focus only on the richer consumers, the top of the pyramid, it is small suppliers, it is people importing stuff from China and elsewhere. It's all the small people who are serving the small people. And it's all yoked together, as you know, with small digital transactions, which collectively make us the largest digital transactor in the world. So it is, in fact, my book is dedicated to small consumers served by small suppliers, all yoked together with digital warriors who do billions of small transactions. Collectively, as the Lilliputs did in Gulliver's Travels, they have slain many a Gulliver multinational and said, this is not the way we want it, this is the way you have to do it.
I want to get into each of those points that you've mentioned in greater detail using the framework that's outlined in your book. But another broad sort of opinion from you, based, of course, on decades of experience. You've studied consumer behavior closely. You've advised big businesses. What are some of the big paradoxes and challenges, anecdotally, that stand out? This will make many watching sit up, take notice, take notes.
I think the first thing I'd like to point out is the way we process value. I mean, Indians are absolutely superbly good at looking at benefit, processing it, looking at not just price, at cost, the total cost. If I have to spend a little more so that I don't have to do casual leave and I don't have to take an auto rickshaw, that's what total cost is. And they're very good at saying paisa vasool. Now, paisa vasool, if you are, let's say, a middle income person, could be buying the latest model of a two-wheeler. And if you're a rich person who's buying a two-wheeler to aid the car, then it is buying the not so rich model or not so expensive model because it is not a status signaler in any kind. You got a car. Now, that's the kind of stuff that makes, or for example, if you look at, I have written about this in my first book as well, a beautician who is what we would call in the bottom, maybe between the 20th and 40th percentile of income, so not very well off. And she says to me that she goes to people's houses and does beauty care. And she says, I have two pay channels at home. And I say, why on earth you have two pay channels for movies at home? And she says, I have I have two teenage children. When they step out of the house, they will spend money. So better to keep them at home. And my mother-in-law has to stay home to cook for me so I can come to your house after your meetings and slug you for a premium. And so that's how her paisa vasool works. And so when people say value conscious Indian consumer, it begs the question, what is value? How do we process it? Why? And that's one part. And I think the other is just the hydra-headed monster. I mean, of course, we're a large market for Lamborghinis, as seems to be the flavor of the week. Everyone's talking about it. We're a large market for BMWs, and we are also a very, very large market that cannot afford even the base prices that the developed world puts out.
There's one sort of practical question that I just wanted to get out of my way, clarify in my head. You, in the book, keep using the term consumer India rather than the Indian consumer. And I'm wondering if I'm overreading some significance into it, or is there any thought behind that?
There is, because I've always been stressed out when people say, tell me about the Indian consumer. I mean, we are a hydra-headed monster in the most affectionate way I say it. But, we are just so many of us and so different that when you talk about the Indian consumer, you are assuming, forcing, dreaming, hoping that you will have a singular narrative. And there is no singular narrative at all. And so I like to talk about consumer India because that is the aggregate of many Indian consumer types, and all together are giving you your glorious number of whatever largest consumer base we are in the world. So I like consumer India. When I'm asked to speak on the Indian consumer, it stresses me out because I don't know which one we're talking about.
Point taken. Well, in the book there are a lot of fascinating details, but in this conversation, I'm trying to, get the big picture out there. You've addressed consumer India through a three-part framework. There is structure, there is behavior, and there is supply. Why is this framework important? And more importantly, how does it help businesses address the consumer India opportunity better?
Right. As they would say in America, thank you for asking me this question and giving me an opportunity to respond. I think when we think about consumer India and Indian consumption, a lot of the discourse is around behavior. What people do. We saw these guys at the nightclub. Can you believe it? In the smaller town, I actually saw a 36 or 552-inch color TV and so on and so forth. Behavior is, to my mind, a done deal. There is no problem with behavior. In fact, we behave very well towards consumption. It's our new god in the pantheon, so we're fine. But where we come a cropper is not because behavior is not conducive to us, but when companies complain, it's because the structure is not so nice. We're not as rich as we think we are. We're not as poor as we think we are. And we talked about structure earlier. So unless, and if you add modest education and if you add geographical scatter, I think that is where the problem with exploiting or unleashing the potential of the Indian market for companies is. So I really wanted to bring focus to structure and say we don't like looking at it, we don't like talking about it, but occupation is important because people can't spend unless they earn, and it's how people earn. So I have tried to force everybody to engage with the gore of structure. And I would never have included supply in a book on consumption, maybe, the last two that I wrote, because whenever people used to come and tell me, particularly overseas companies, that, supply, when we put in supply, demand will follow, and that hasn't been the case. So I would never have done that. But today when I take stock of where we are, I find that the consumer is way ahead of the supplier. The consumer wants so many more things. Where is the supply? If you look at all the stuff we lap up from China, it's so many interesting little problem-solving things. It's chappals that squeak so that you can go through the forest, the farm at night and keep snakes away. It's our little electric diyas. I mean, we've all experienced it at various times. So I'm really saying, where is the problem-solving supply, and why we're short? Even on tarot card readers, astrologers, airport space, Roro, our Alibag link can easily support much more. So that's why I'm looking at supply, because I also believe, very briefly, that we at last have the keys to unlock the mass market, and that's the digital business model. So I felt it was important to include supply as well. So that's.
As you state very squarely and explicitly in your book, television anchors tend to say, we're talking about consumption today, so let's park supply to the side. I have absorbed that point, and we are going to talk about supply in greater detail, but I'm following this methodically. So I'm coming back to structure. And again, brevity means that we can't cover every aspect of the structure of consumer India. But if you had to pick one or two of the least understood aspects of consumer India structure, what would you share?
I will call it the most disliked and the aspect we never want to talk about, and that is occupation. At an aggregate level, we talk about formal, informal, 4%, 96%, whatever the numbers may be. But when you actually put out income, when you actually look at companies who define target markets, they say salaried. The number of people who have predictable salaries is actually not that many. Or when you say 1/3 is casual labor, so why are you surprised if construction slows down, people will not be able to do? So I think, or just the entire skittishness of consumer demand because of the way we earn. So I would say we hate discussing occupation. We generally don't like discussing income distributions, and I'm sure you'll come to that when you discuss the new survey. But occupation, I think, is the Achilles heel that we would rather not talk about. It's not that there is no data available. It's just, I don't know, to my mind, it's scary.
Indeed. It's sort of hard to get your head around. And while I was reading, I was thinking, I never thought about the volatility of occupation that determines the consumption graph in many ways. You talked about income distribution. Again, why is that an area that we don't pay enough attention to, and why is it so important?
I think we don't pay enough. Well, we pay enough attention to it, but there's a certain amount of, so what do I do with it? Because large swaths of the consumption base have incomes that are hard to serve, as I always say, to tie up your bonuses to a low margin, high volume business of a volatile consumer base that is modestly educated and modestly occupied is a really scary thing. On the other hand, because the creamy layer has got more creamy over time, thank you God, that's why there is a flight, just as in your stock market, there's been a flight to safety for a while in between. Similarly, I think there has been for a while now a flight to the premium end of the market, or the top 20% of Indian consumers, or consumer India, which is a discontinuously high spender, and that's where a lot of the surplus income rise. So I think the view is on occupation is, if it's politically correct to say, why kiss the frog and wait for the frog to become the prince when I can kiss the prince directly and wait for the frog to become the prince on its own, and then I'll think about it.
Well,
you don't like our numbers.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that, and there were some very interesting examples of MNCs who've operated in India waiting for the frog to become the prince while they focus on the top end of the market, or, the creamy left, we can call it that. What are they missing by taking that approach? And it seems to be a fairly prevalent approach.
Yes, and it includes a lot of large Indian companies as well, other than a handful that have really shown us the power of the mass market. What they are missing is the fact that mass markets like Time and Tide will not wait for any person, and that's why in the context of supply, I talk about the small suppliers. If you looked at recent statements from companies about where the mass market demand went. They're saying, oh, and we have a lot of local and small competition. So I think you're leaving it open, and we are a country with a great entrepreneurial spirit. And I have said in my book as well that small companies are agile, or small suppliers are agile, they're nimble, they're regional, and they actually customize very well. So I think you're seeding ground. But having said that, with the strategy advice hat on, I would say that it is a very clear choice. But if you are wanting returns on such a large GDP, but your strategy only targets a small amount, then you're bound to, well, someone's going to get sacked along the way, or whatever it might mean. The other thing is that when people say there is a particular number above which consumption takes off, I mean, I know it's a very popular view, and it is academically also a much stated view, but that is basically saying to the consumer that this is my cost, this. And if you can jump over that, like the hurdle race we have as children, then you get to be my consumer. But if you are here, then you can't. And that's what the small business is saying. Small business is saying, I get you. I know you have low incomes. I know you have needs. You want to paint your house before your daughter's wedding. Let me see how I can do it for you.
I'm tempted to mime your business advisory role and ask, are large businesses, whether multinational or Indian, conscious of the ground they are seeding and accordingly looking at the way they function, or is that still a thought in progress?
In fact, I see a little bit of the reverse, that they seem to feel that if the grass is greener on the other side, and it is true that at this point in time, post-COVID, for example, the rich have got richer, right? So in this environment, when you keep saying, hey, look at the mass market, the stock market's not looking at the mass market. And companies are in fact looking at redirecting their energies from the mass market to the top end, and actually doing better on profit on that count as well. So I think it will probably come back and bite in a few years' time, but for now you can get by and deliver your results. In fact, you can do splendidly. It's like if you don't advertise for a year in a high demand situation, you will save all that money that goes to the bottom line, but aage jaake dekhte hain what happens.
The huge change, though, is the digital proposition. And, therein lies a totally different path forward. Of course, you can see how small consumers, small suppliers have really lapped it up and reaped the benefit. But it's a new way of thinking, which probably makes big businesses also relook at the mass market opportunity, or am I overstating the point?
I think right now the fact that digital is inescapable and so on is why people are looking at it, maybe less to tackle the mass market, but more. So there are a few things to this digital business proposition. And the whole idea is to be able to square the circle. The consumer wants high performance at a low price, and you want to profit. Now, how do you actually sort this? So as I'm also saying in my book, the keys to doing so are now available, because digitalizing processes will crash costs completely. I think companies get that. They embrace that. They love that. And we have actually seen phenomenal progress in putting digital hearts into businesses, right? And for example, the amount of time it used to take to do KYC or to upload something or to sell or to ensure that somebody doesn't missell your financial services product can now all be controlled digitally in no time at all. So that's wonderful. On the other side, we're seeing people as well who are aggregating small suppliers. So whether it's your cloud kitchens, whether it's your platforms, you get cow dung on Amazon, that must come from a small supplier, I'm not sure. You get every little thing that you ever wanted from small suppliers who are actually quite interesting. So there is that aggregation as well. And there is also the whole sharing economy that has come in, right? So you can now rent everything, and from a very expensive dress to wedding lehengas, which are also hugely expensive, to tractors to cars. So it's sachetization of everything that's now possible. So I think companies see the power of that, they see the potential of that, but attacking the mass market and all the blue ocean players is coming from digital native, new kids on the block, the unicorns, the soonicorns, They're not making a profit, but they're lovely in terms of proven business models.
Well, on that note, we're going to take a quick break, and when we return, I'm going to ask you quite squarely why you wrote this book, what are some of the keys to unlocking the mass market opportunity in India. That's after this break. Welcome back to Serious Business on NDTV, in conversation today with Rama Bijapurkar on her latest book, Lilliput India, How Small is Driving India's Mega Consumption Story. And, we've had a chance to cover a lot of sort of insights with Rama, but I wanted to ask you, Rama, very simply, why did you write this book? Do you think there is still a lot of learning when it comes to consumer India, a lot of learning required?
One is because it's what I do. So I guess, to be truthful, we're like that only in a never-before world was periodic stock taking of where we are, and it's what I do. But I also realized when I address a lot of boards and so on, visiting boards, that it's a bit like a Piccadilly tube station. One group of people is completely replaced by another. So we find that everybody's again asking the same fundamental questions. So I think the trick was how not to repeat yourself, but to make it relevant to the time. And also, if you've written a book called We're Like That Only, you're completely paranoid about whether we're still like that only or we're not like that only. So it's a good stock taking. And I actually analyzed 100 unicorns and 58 unicorns, and I was completely excited by what I was seeing, and I thought should talk about it in the context of consumption.
Okay, in the last chapter of your book, you talk about unlocking India's mass market opportunity, and I know you've already given us some pointers in that direction, but if we had to sort of summarize and say, these are the key principles, maybe the top 2 or 3, what would you share?
I think marketplaces are, according to me, the future of our markets, because it allows a lot of small to come on and all the good stuff that comes with it. So marketplaces are the new malls. Hopefully there will be more than real estate plays. That's one thing that's really exciting. The second is that consumer India is completely ready for digital. I mean, I've always said that when our temples have gone digital and you needed an OTP during COVID to visit the mandir, you get online darshan. I mean, the rest of it is frankly not moot at all about whether they're ready or not. I also think that platforms for the services, I mean, people like Urban Company, if you look at people like Swiggy, aggregate small consumers. I also think that this is back to the future. So I remember my nanny and housekeeper many, many years ago, who used to gather 3 or 4 of her pals, and they would rent, a rundown taxi, and they would go to a wholesale market in Hyderabad, and they would buy stuff in bulk at those rates, and they would come back and they would split it. And now you can actually, all the drop shipping, some of the brands, some of the new businesses you see, they're just enabling random people to do exactly the same thing with much greater felicity. So it is who we are. I also feel that it fits naturally with the structure of our consumption. And that's what makes it so exciting.
Well, I'm going to leave it at that, Rama. I said at the outset, I don't know if we're going to be able to do justice to all of the nuance that is in this book, but it's been an absolutely fascinating read, and you're right. Every few years we do sense the change, but we feel the need for a stock take, and that's been captured wonderfully in Lilliput Land, How Small is Driving India's Mega Consumption Story. Rama Bijapurkar, thank you for your time on NDTV and your insights.
Thank you so much for having me here.